Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2022. This is an event that was created by Vin at Revenant Reads, and he has gathered together a small bridge crew of co-hosts designed to celebrate Star Trek fiction for the month of August and September. So Book Trek 2022 is a 2-month event, and in August it's the wrath of Book Trek. It's go at old familiar territory. Usually that will mean that you are spending time in the Roddenberry version of Star Trek. So Star Trek the original series and all of the movies, Star Trek the animated series, Star Trek the Next Generation and the movies, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise. There's a lot of stuff there to read, more than anyone could read in a lifetime, I would think. I've read a huge amount of it, but not nearly all of it. Not nearly. And I am just picking these things at random. My iPad mini, which I now live on. I absolutely live on it. I was worried. I got this. This is an iPad mini 4. One of you sent it to me. And I'm enormously grateful for that because my iPad mini original generation was too slow. It's too pokey. The software has moved on. The iPad mini 4 is plenty fast enough, plenty strong enough to pick up a Wi-Fi signal anywhere in the Alpha Quadrant. My only worry was that when I cleaned off all the bloatware and installed all of my home apps, the things that I use to make this usable, I was right at the ceiling of the 16 gigs that came on this thing, and because it's an Apple device, there's no way to expand that unless you use the Apple Cloud, which you absolutely shouldn't do. So I thought, easy come, easy go. It was just that quick that I reached the limits of this device. And then the other day, no idea why, I'm not exactly a tech person, the other day I picked it up. I was missing it. It is an ideal device for quick emails, for social media browsing, for reading, an ideal device. I picked it up the other day and thought, it's a terrible shame. You should at least, read a book on this or two. You can still do that. I could do that on my original iPad. And on a whim the other day, I did that. I picked it up. I went right away to the settings, and I looked at iPad storage, and I had some room. I had several gigs of space left. It wasn't true. Last time I looked at the device, it was at 16 gigs. No idea what accounts for that. Maybe the thing is automatically offloading apps that I don't use. But all of a sudden there's room to sideload books on this thing, to download books on this thing. So we're back in business. I am still severely tempted. I'm justifying the digression about tech because all of this is Star Trek to me. When Star Trek The Next Generation characters were using data pads in the 1990s, I had no idea that I would ever have one myself. It seemed wonderful, but I had no idea. When I was watching the original Star Trek, and it was very purposely a universe without paper. Kirk was using a slate with a stylus, but he was not writing on paper. He was writing electronically. I watched those things and saw those original data pads on Star Trek and just salivated at the idea of that. And now I have this tech in my hand. I have looked high and low for a 6-inch handheld tablet that looks like a Star Trek data pad, that looks that way. I would pay money for such a thing. If it had good storage, I would pay money for it. Have not been able to find it. Haven't even been able to find an iPad mini case that makes it look like that. But that's the reason that I'm digressing here. That's how I'm justifying it, is that I'm using Star Trek technology. Those of you who are young and grew up with this stuff will have no idea what it was like. For us to watch the original Star Trek and see doors that opened automatically, see computers that had people's faces on them, and that answered instantly, and that had automatic intelligence of their own. Anyway, I am still strongly tempted to lay out a chunk of money that I can't really spare on the iPad mini 6 and a great case. A case that makes it invulnerable so that I can throw it in a bag, I throw it on the bed, I can take it with me on the subway. I'm still tempted to do that. Get an iPad mini 6 with the maximum amount of storage and a great case. I can't, ordinarily when it comes to wanting tech, I make impetuous, hair-tossing demands as a sexy influencer to all of you, saying, go get me that tech and send it to me. Give it to me as tribute for me being the sexy influencer that I am. But even I don't have the chutzpah to do that with a brand new iPad mini 6. I don't think any of you would do it. So I'm still dreaming of it. But in the meantime, this has storage on it. So I'm using this. And it has a function, the iPad has a function where if you have a long row of things, I have a huge number of ebooks in my iBooks app. If you rolling your way through that and you suddenly stop, it will keep rolling for a bit. It has a little bit of momentum. And I use that to pick my next Star Trek thing. The nearest Star Trek when it stops is the thing that I pick. That's not always going to be true in August. I'm going to revisit a lot of old friends in August, but I don't want to just do that. So I did that this time around, and I came up with another Star Trek The Next Generation novel. And it's one that I haven't read by an author I have read and very much like. It's Intellivore by Diane Duane. I want to make sure the bean is still visible, but this is novel number 45 in the Next Generation series. I think this comes from the late 90s, 1996 or 7 or something like that. And at the beginning, the premise of this novel is that the Enterprise under Jean-Luc Picard has been ordered to avoid an expanse in between two galactic arms in the Milky Way. I don't know how many of you are up on your basic astronomy, but you are in an arm of the Milky Way. You are a long way from the center of the galaxy. And the Milky Way is a spiral galaxy. So those arms have broad stretches of relatively empty space in between them. And that empty space gets broader and broader the further out on any arm you go. And one of the conceits of this novel is that those areas of inter-arm space are less explored than the more stellarly populated areas of the arms themselves. And at the beginning of this book, the Enterprise is ordered to a planetary system in a void outside of the Sagittarius arm. And two other starships are ordered too. They are creations of Diane Duane, who's our author. They have captains, quirky crews, different specs of their own. They're different makes of starships from the Enterprise. And one of the captains is an old friend of Jean-Luc Picard's. And clearly what Diane Duane wants to do in the course of this adventure, all three of those starships are part of this adventure as they go into this relatively uncharted territory. And clearly one of the things that Diane Duane wants to do is show us the interplay of those personalities. And it works. That is one of the most enjoyable aspects of this book. Another thing that's very different from this book jumps out right away. I was mentioning yesterday that sometimes a writer will get a brief to write one of these books, or they'll pitch a brief and be given no time at all to flesh out their book. So what you get is fairly thin stuff. This is not fairly thin stuff. This is full of research on Diane Duane's part. Just full of that, including, I have to admit, a large amount of research on the Enterprise D's cast of characters. They are fairly well done in the course of this book. And the mission revolves around a question that comes up in Star Trek all the time. It's come up in the original Star Trek. It comes up in The Next Generation a few times. It comes up in some of the movies, which is, what if the Enterprise were to go up against something that is just utterly beyond them, technologically speaking? Just utterly beyond their capabilities. That doesn't happen in New Trek, in Alex Kurtzman Trek, because no phenomenon, technological, sociological, astronomical, is greater than Michael Burnham. No phenomenon is greater than her. So you can't have that anymore. But in the old Star Trek, it happens fairly regularly. And the idea here is that there's an ancient civilization in the dark between those spiral arms that is long gone, but they invented a strange kind of technology called the Intellivore. The Intellivore is the technology that is used. That is bicameral. It's a hybrid kind of AI and Borg-like inquisitiveness, and it subsumes your mind. It subsumes yourself when it reaches you. There are Borg-like elements involved here, but there are also Trill-like elements involved. The Star Trek race where humanoids are joined with a symbiont that isn't humanoid. It's a giant slug that has ascensions of its own, and they become a joined being. One of the captains of one of the starships in this novel is a joined Trill. And that fact, that nature, plus Data's nature as an android, they become incredibly key once these starships encounter the Intellivore. It would be, I think probably we're led to believe it would be just game over if those elements of these crews weren't there. If these were just three starships of ordinary humans, it would probably be game over when they encounter this ancient technology that is beyond their understanding, at least at first. And that is really meaty. All of that is meaty, really meaty stuff. And yet, I bet you can hear a but in my voice. You can hear that I'm not completely on board. And that's because I'm not completely on board. This was so much more substantial than the next generation novel that I read yesterday, Devil's Heart. So much more going on in this book. So much more of the author's presence. I don't know if that means that Diane Duane can work much faster and better on a tight deadline. I've never met her. Or if she's just a better writer than, who was it, Carmen Carter that we talked to last time? I don't know, one way or another. I know that, unlike with Devil's Heart, this author has credit in the Bank of Steve. This author has written a couple of Star Trek novels that I really, really liked. I wasn't completely sold on her big book, Spock's World, even though it's one of the best-selling Star Trek novels of all time. And maybe I need to revisit it for Book Trek 2022. I wasn't completely sold on it. But she wrote a book called My Enemy, My Ally, which is wonderful. She wrote a book called The Wounded Sky, I think is what it's called, that has an amazing cast of characters in it. And she's playful and very, very thorough. I love those two books. The Wounded Sky and My Enemy, My Ally are amazing Star Trek novels. I should revisit them for Book Trek 2022. I really should. But this book, the reason that I love those books wasn't the ideas behind it. There are great ideas behind this book. Lots of them. And not just the big one either. There's a lot of thought that goes into every aspect of this book. It will not bore you. And that was true in her other books as well. Lots and lots of background thought, but there was also a lot of heart involved in the two novels of hers that I really liked. And I didn't get a whole lot of that in this book. The most that I got it was in something that obviously is here only so that she can show it, which is the relationship between the different starships, the different crews, the different captains. That is entertaining right all the way to the end, even though a part of the end with one of those captains is intensely predictable. I don't hold that against science fiction at all, and especially Star Trek fiction. This is a very formulaic book. It reads very much like it is done after Diane Duane submerged herself in the hourly format of the normal network show. It has beats in it that are practically made for commercial breaks. Again, I don't hold that against it. That kind of formulaic structure is endemic to Star Trek and always has been. I'd be more amazed. I'm always more amazed when it's not there. It's just, I'm a late convert to enjoying The Next Generation. And now that I am, I see all the potential involved in that bridge crew. And I didn't get a lot of payoff from that in this book. So, I mean, The Devil's Heart was a disappointment. There were only a couple of aspects of it that I liked, and a lot of it seemed rushed to me. This was not anywhere near as big a disappointment. It wasn't even technically a disappointment at all. It's by far the least enjoyable book that I've read from this author. I've read some books of hers that weren't Star Trek either that I liked. I don't think I've ever read anything of hers that seemed quite so distracted as this. I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't a wow of an experience. And that means, if you're keeping track at home, that means 2 Star Trek experiences in a row that were not wows. One, Intellivore was not a disappointment. I shouldn't sell it short, but I want to be blown away by what I'm reading. In everything, not just Star Trek, and all the time, not just some of the time. So maybe, to avoid the curse of Deep Space Nine, last year during Book Trek, during the month devoted to Deep Space Nine, I fell afoul of the Magrims, and I could not get myself out of the doldrums. Everything I read was worse than the thing I read before. I'm not subject to that in the shorter Book Trek, and maybe to avoid anything like that, I will go back to a favorite tonight. Maybe I'll do that. Just to reset the calibers, just so I'm not cursing myself. We will see. I'll try a random spin of the wheel tonight, and if it looks like it's going to be a third disappointment in a row, then I won't do it. I'll go back to an old friend and leave the lackluster books for the next time. But one way or another, I will do that, and I will report back tomorrow. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.